Hello everybody and welcome to Ukraine the Possible, the podcast with a social justice perspective, a view from inside a nation resisting imperialist invasion, a voice in search of solidarity. The war in Ukraine. We see the images seared into our memory, devastated cities, streams of refugees, the weary faces of soldiers. Their eyes hold pain. But beneath this visible tragedy, behind the ruins and the tears, another catastrophe is unfolding, silent but just as destructive. Many of us, caught in the flood of news, haven't fully registered it yet. It's a crisis of the human spirit, a wave of psychological trauma sweeping across Ukraine, leaving deep scars on the inner lives of millions. It's crucial to understand, this trauma isn't just a reaction to horror, it's a direct consequence of Russian aggression. The result of decisions made by those in power, decisions that inflict unbearable suffering on ordinary people. This war, like the recent COVID-19 pandemic and other crises before it, starkly reveals the fragility of our psychological well-being. These events test our ability to withstand immense pressure. Often, this happens against a backdrop of pre-existing systemic problems: social inequality, inadequate social safety nets, political instability. Issues like limited access to healthcare or low wages made people vulnerable even before the fighting began. The war in Ukraine is more than a line item in geopolitical reports. It's an existential challenge that will shape the country's future for decades, long after the guns fall silent and the sirens cease. The question is, can we find the strength, the humanity, to forge paths towards healing for millions? Their psychological state cries out for help. Today, we delve into this often overlooked world of internal wounds. We'll explore the profound psychological impact of the war on Ukraine and its people, trying to understand not just individual reactions, but the social and political roots of this mass trauma. And we'll ask, what will it take? From individuals, from society, from the world, to begin the long, difficult process of healing a nation's collective trauma. A process impossible without justice, accountability, and deep social change. The numbers, stark as always, paint a deeply troubling picture. Since the full-scale Russian invasion began, dividing Ukrainian lives into before and after, the country has become the epicenter of a mental health crisis of unprecedented scale. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, anxiety disorders, severe depression, their spread resembles an epidemic. It affects not only those on the front lines, but millions of civilians, even in relatively safe regions. The statistics reflect both the scale of the war and the weaknesses in the country's mental health support systems, which left the population highly susceptible. Mental health experts are sounding the alarm about the staggering scope of this crisis. They report an unparalleled surge in mental health conditions among Ukrainians. Conservative estimates from international organizations suggest the numbers have at least tripled. Other independent research points to increases of 5 or even 7 times compared to pre-war levels. To grasp the depth of this, we must confront the reality of war. War is concentrated trauma. It's born from political violence and aggression, often driven by goals that inflict suffering on ordinary people. It's the grinding stress of living under the threat of death, the grief of losing loved ones, the destruction of normal life, and the crushing uncertainty of the future. These clinical terms, PTSD, depression, anxiety, aren't abstractions. They are the lived, painful experience of millions of Ukrainians. An experience fundamentally altering their inner world and shaping their future. And it's vital to recognize, while even severe physical wounds are visible and often treatable, the psychological scars of war can last a lifetime. They slowly poison existence, undermining dignity and prospects. Unless timely, skilled, and crucially, accessible psychological help is provided. Unless there is daily care, support, and empathy from loved ones and the wider community. Unfortunately, Ukraine's healthcare and social protection systems weren't always equipped for such challenges, exacerbating the war's impact. For millions of civilians, children, adolescents, and soldiers, the psychological burden is immense. Let's move beyond the statistics and look at individual experiences. First, there's the pervasive fear and paralyzing anxiety. Imagine living under constant threat of shelling, waking to air raid sirens, worrying every minute about loved ones, those who fled, those on the front lines, those under occupation, those missing. This isn't fleeting worry, it's the daily reality for millions. Sociological studies show baseline anxiety levels have risen by 40 to 50% nationwide, nearly doubling in frontline regions. Behind these figures are millions teetering on the edge of exhaustion. The constant fear is compounded by economic instability and job losses. Then, there is the grief and the weight of irreparable loss. Millions are mourning loved ones. They've lost homes, possessions, the anchors of their lives. War ripped these away, leaving emptiness and pain. This isn't just property loss, it's the loss of security, belonging, home. The UN reports over 13,000 civilian deaths since the full-scale invasion began. A Human Rights Watch investigation estimated at least 10,000 died in Mariupol alone, a minimum estimate. But the losses extend far beyond civilians, reaching deep into the ranks of Ukraine's defenders. Officials have stated that 46,000 soldiers have died on the front lines. More than 10,000 are missing or are being held as prisoners of war by Russia, and the number of wounded has climbed past 380,000. Each number represents a shattered life, an irreplaceable loss for countless families, a raw wound on the nation's heart. These figures are the direct, measurable result of military actions, stemming from the political decision to invade. A third aspect is forced displacement. Millions of families have had to abandon everything, severing social ties. It's not just losing a house, but losing a support network. This deepens feelings of isolation and disorientation. The International Organization for Migration estimates nearly 7 million people are internally displaced within Ukraine. This mass movement creates social rupture, hitting hardest those with fewer resources, exposing and worsening existing inequalities. Refugees often face difficulties adapting, further contributing to mental health issues. And finally, the acute vulnerability of children and adolescents. They are innocent victims, growing up shadowed by fear, pain, and loss. A generation of war is being formed. Their developing minds face the destructive impact of chronic trauma. This can lead to long-term problems, developmental delays, aggression, anxiety, depression. Destroyed schools deprive children of education and normalcy, compounding their trauma. Research published in a 2024 medical journal indicated the year was even deadlier for children, with casualties rising over 50% compared to 2023. UNICEF data reveals the horrifying scale. 1 in 5 children in Ukraine reports losing at least one close relative or friend since the war escalated. The psychological impact isn't metaphorical, it's stark reality. Look at the lives affected. At Kyiv's Pavlov Psychiatric Hospital, they treat war-affected patients, soldiers and civilians alike. For those on the front line, war is a daily reality that brutally damages body and mind. One psychiatrist describes a young soldier who lost comrades. He physically cannot speak about what happened. A month has passed. But even today, when the conversation turns to that horrific event, he instantly falls silent, looks away, swallows hard, unable to utter a single coherent word. Severe PTSD is becoming an almost commonplace diagnosis for Ukrainian military personnel. Flashbacks, nightmares, constant hypervigilance. These are their relentless companions. Ruslan, a young lieutenant and patient, shares his terror. I keep having the same nightmare. Over and over, I dive into a muddy trench, desperately trying to escape shelling, only to realize in horror at the last moment that it's a grave dug just for me. But it's not only PTSD, there's the heavy burden of moral injury. Deep internal suffering stemming from witnessing or participating in acts that violate one's moral code in the landscape of war. These injuries can lead to a loss of faith in humanity and disillusionment with institutions. The return to civilian life after experiencing such horrors is an overwhelming challenge for many. The abrupt shift from combat intensity to relative calm can be jarring, disorienting. Without support, this can lead to substance abuse as a coping mechanism or, tragically, suicide. The psychological casualties of war inflict a deep wound on the entire nation, demanding immediate care and comprehensive rehabilitation. Neuroscience research helps explain what happens inside us. Studies show that trauma, whether from war, political repression, or other overwhelming experiences, triggers a cascade of changes in the brain. These changes affect how we think, feel, and react. When we face a traumatic event, the brain's threat detection system goes into overdrive. The amygdala, the brain's threat detector, plays a key role. It instantly registers danger and triggers the fight or flight response. It signals the hypothalamus, activating a hormonal cascade that releases stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. The body prepares for survival. Heart rate increases, senses sharpen, energy is redirected. Research indicates that stress hormones increase the excitability of connections in the amygdala. This can lead to an enlargement of the amygdala itself, increasing the likelihood of anxiety disorders. Repeated or intense trauma makes the amygdala hypersensitive. It starts reacting even to minor triggers, as if the body is stuck in danger mode. Chronic stress can also cause low-level neuroinflammation, disrupting normal neuron function and potentially impairing cognitive abilities like memory. The hippocampus, crucial for learning and memory, also suffers. Studies show that under prolonged exposure to stress hormones, the hippocampus can shrink, impairing learning and memory formation. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation, is also affected. Under acute stress, its connection to the amygdala weakens, making it harder to think clearly. The hippocampus, responsible for memory context, is also sidelined, leading to fragmented memories, hence those vivid, intrusive flashbacks. Are these changes permanent? Not necessarily. The brain is highly plastic. It can adapt and recover. But the extent of recovery depends on the severity of the trauma, individual resilience, and support systems. After a single traumatic event, the brain might return to baseline within weeks or months if the person feels safe. However, prolonged experiences like war or ongoing repression can solidify these brain changes. This is why in PTSD, the amygdala remains hyperactive, the hippocampus impaired, and the prefrontal cortex struggles. These effects can linger for years. Imagine a soldier in combat, explosions, loss, constant threat. Their brain learns to perceive any loud noise as mortal danger. The part of the brain responsible for rational thought and emotional control is overwhelmed. Over time, this manifests as PTSD, hypervigilance, nightmares, emotional numbing. Research suggests political repression works similarly. The unpredictability of surveillance or violence keeps the stress system on high alert, leaving similar neural imprints. Studies show constant exposure to trauma also leads to emotional numbing, shutting down feelings as a survival tactic. Consequently, individuals may become less able to feel empathy for others. All this contributes to rising mental health problems, decreased empathy in society, and potentially more impulsive behavior. Yet, amidst this growing crisis, a vital network of grassroots support is forming in Ukraine, built on compassion and dedication. Historical experience, like battling epidemics, shows that such community-based aid is often highly effective, especially when state resources are stretched thin. Across war-torn Ukraine, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of local initiatives have sprung up. Volunteer psychologists offer free counseling, peer support groups provide safe spaces, and online resources and hotlines offer a lifeline. Non-governmental organizations, both Ukrainian and international, also play an invaluable role. They run specialized programs offering various therapies, counseling, and creative approaches like art or music therapy. Notably, the most successful initiatives often involve rapid, flexible responses, short-term training, psychological first aid, brief support programs. These initiatives are steps towards resilience and reducing stigma. A key factor is involving people with lived experience of overcoming crisis. However, while acknowledging the heroism of these efforts, volunteer aid cannot fully replace systemic state support. A long-term strategy is needed, addressing not just psychological needs, but also the social and economic factors impacting mental health. Perhaps one of the most significant shifts brought by the war is the gradual erosion of stigma surrounding mental health in Ukrainian society. Conversations are becoming more open. The need for psychological self-care is increasingly recognized. Stories of people undergoing therapy are becoming examples of resilience. Paradoxically, the war is catalyzing a healthier attitude towards psychological well-being. People are sharing experiences, supporting each other, seeking professional help. Creativity also plays a crucial role in healing. Art, literature, music become therapeutic tools. Ukrainians express the pain of war through creative outlets, seeking solace, understanding, and a common language for their experiences. This is undoubtedly a sign of national resilience. But despite these positive shifts, systemic challenges remain immense. For instance, alcohol is often used as self-medication, particularly by men. This shouldn't be seen merely as individual weakness, but perhaps as a symptom of deep collective despair, a predictable response to overwhelming trauma inflicted by external forces, exacerbated by a lack of accessible alternatives. The war shatters lives, undermines dignity, and destroys economic prospects, feeding the problem. The psychological impact of the war constitutes generational trauma. Children, adults, the elderly, all generations are affected, children form the war generation, adults may feel like a lost generation, and the elderly often become a forgotten generation. The long-term consequences will demand enormous attention and resources. So, what is the way forward? The solution lies in a truly comprehensive approach, drawing not only on public health experience, but also on an understanding of the deep social and political roots of this tragedy. Mental health must be an absolute priority. Integrating care into the general healthcare system, ensuring rapid and equitable access for all, and developing community-based programs are crucial. Strengthening social connections and combating misinformation are also vital, but a truly comprehensive approach must go beyond individual care. It must address the root causes of suffering. This means demanding political accountability for the war, working towards social justice within Ukraine, and rebuilding infrastructure and the economy in a way that benefits all segments of society, not just a few. It requires large-scale government investment in healthcare, education, and social protection, not just reliance on the heroism of NGOs and volunteers. True healing of collective trauma is impossible without restoring a basic sense of safety, justice, and genuine hope for the future. And that demands profound social and political transformation, both within Ukraine and internationally. The psychological wounds of war are real and devastating. Overcoming this crisis is not just a humanitarian task, it's an investment in Ukraine's future, its capacity to recover and thrive. Healing is a long, arduous process requiring time, resources, and collective responsibility. But there is immense potential in the resilience of the Ukrainian people, in their capacity for self-organization and mutual aid. The path to healing lies through acknowledging the full depth of the trauma, through openness and destigmatization, through ensuring access to care, through mutual support, and indispensably, through the struggle for a more just, secure, and accountable society where the value of human life is paramount. This podcast relies on credible sources, which are detailed in the description. For further reference, you can access the materials through the provided links.